The Toronto Maple Leafs have fired head coach Sheldon Keefe. This comes after the team lost their first-round playoff series against the Boston Bruins in Game 7 on Saturday night. We'll have reaction coming up.
Toronto Police Superintendent Stacey is being cross-examined today at a police tribunal hearing after she admitted to providing exam answers to black officers.
And the Canadian Cancer Society is changing its position on screening and calling for provinces to lower the age for breast cancer screening. We're going to tell you all about that.
Good afternoon and welcome to CP24 Live at noon. I'm Bakari Savage.
And I'm Lena Latifat. Thank you for joining us. Our top story, Sheldon Keefe has been fired as head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah, Keefe was promoted from the Marlies to head coach of the Leafs midway through the 2019-2020 season. And despite making it to the playoffs, every year he was head coach, the team only won a single playoff series, and they were ousted in the first round again this year in 7 games against the Bruins. Well, the Leafs management says that it's time for a new voice, and the search for a new coach will begin immediately. General Manager Brad Treliving and President Brendan Shanahan, they are scheduled to speak to the media tomorrow alongside new MLSE boss Keith Pelly.
And for reaction to this announcement, this development, we're joined live by TSN's Gino Retta, host of That's Hockey on TSN. Gino, thanks so much for making time for us. The writing was on the wall, wasn't it?
Yeah, it certainly was. And here's the deal. Sheldon Keefe is a good coach. He never was, though, a great coach. The difference is this. During the regular season, amongst coaches with 300 or more NHL games coached, Sheldon Keefe was #1 in win percentage. But when it came to the playoffs, he was among the absolute worst in NHL history in terms of having success in the postseason. He had an offense that was the second best offense in the entire NHL during the regular season this year. And then in the playoffs, it went totally quiet. Other coaches seemed to be adjusting very, very well to what the Toronto Maple Leafs were doing, and the Leafs were unable to counteract that. And because of that, Sheldon Keefe at this point is the first head to fall in this situation. I expect still more changes, but at this point, the team decided that Sheldon Keefe just was not the guy to try to lead them back to the playoffs again next year.
Okay, so Gino, you said Sheldon Keefe was a good coach, not a great coach. What is it going to take to woo a great coach to the Maple Leafs and get that cup, get the coveted cup?
It's not going to take much to woo a great coach, I'll tell you this. The question is picking the right guy. And one of the guys who's an option right now is Craig Berube. This is a guy who coached the St. Louis Blues to a Stanley Cup title back in 2019. So he knows how to win. It's very important that the organization brings in somebody who knows how to win. And he's also a very tough coach. Sheldon Keefe was considered a player's coach, sometimes maybe a little bit too easy on players who were underachieving. Craig Berube's never been accused of being too easy on the players. I think they need somebody who's a really tough coach, someone who listens to the players and has the players' ears, but somebody who will push the players beyond what they feel comfortable with. And I think the players on this team, while extremely talented, haven't been pushed beyond where they feel comfortable.
So I guess now the question is, are more changes on the way? What do you think?
That's an excellent, excellent question. And I think there was a lot of question marks about Brendan Shanahan is now in his 10th season leading this organization. And there was some question about whether or not he would be returning, but he's a part of that leadership group meeting that's going to be meeting with us in the media tomorrow morning. So it looks like Brendan Shanahan is going to come back. The same cannot be said for the players on this Toronto Maple Leafs roster. The core 4 on this team right now, Austin Matthews, Willie Nylander, Mitch Marner, John Tavares, make almost $50 million starting next year. You can't spend that much on just those 4 players and expect to be able to compete in the National Hockey League in the cap era. So I think you're going to see some serious questions about whether Mitch Marner and or John Tavares is asked to waive his no movement clause, and potentially the Leafs, if they could find a fit somewhere else, move one of those salaries, take money that's being spent on offense, and use that money instead to provide some more defense on this team. This team needs more balance. So I think, to your point, we are going to see some more changes on this Toronto Maple Leafs organization, and probably in the near future.
But wait, Gino, you're telling me this isn't just going to be a plug and play. We come in, we get a new coach in to lead this 4 to get that cup next season. it's not going to happen like that?
No, you know, it's a really, really good point you make, because oftentimes when a team fires a coach, they say, you know what, we got a really, really good team here. We just need somebody better to lead them. What the Toronto Maple Leafs need here is a better bench boss. They've made that decision today, but they're also going to have to change the personnel. You can't just keep running back these same players the way they have done now for years. Under Brendan Shanahan, this group has only won one playoff series. That's just not good enough. That's way too much talent. You got players, Nylander and Marner, 100-point seasons. John Tavares, who was one of the premier players in the league. Austin Matthews, 69 goals this year. You've got great talent, but it's just too top-heavy. There needs to be a shift in how you spend those dollars. Maybe sacrifice a little bit of offense, bring in some more defense, because defense wins at this time of the year in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And this time next year, the Leafs want to be in the Stanley Cup playoffs, but they want to be better prepared. And that's going to take more than just changing the head coach.
That is for sure. And all eyes on tomorrow's press conference, of course, at TSN's Gino Reda. Thanks so much for joining us, host of That's Hockey on TSN.
Thanks, Gino.
Thanks, guys. It's never boring.
Also making news, Superintendent Stacey Clark is being cross-examined at a police tribunal hearing today.
Yeah, so Clark was explaining and describing the moments that she took photos of questions for a promotional exam and then sent them to candidates in advance. Clark says that she broke the rules in the wake of the Toronto Police Service abandoning a hiring process she said would have made the entire promotions procedure more fair to black candidates. Well, human rights, social justice, and anti-racism advocate Kingsley Gilliam spoke to reporters outside the tribunal.
At the end of the day, the same thing comes down. What they did, they just selectively implement what they want and what they don't want to change, like the hiring system. They don't change it. You know, I remember when they couldn't find black or brown people to hire. They said there were no qualified ones. And so the Ministry of Solicitor General created a policing unit and recruited people and trained them.
The tribunal is deciding how to discipline Clark, mostly by where she will stand in the rankings. An Oakville home has been destroyed in an overnight fire.
And firefighters, they were called to the house
on Bridge Road around 2 a.m. When they arrived, they found the house fully engulfed. According to fire officials, the home was vacant and there were no injuries. The Ontario Fire Marshal has now been notified.
And the province is introducing new legislation to better protect kids' data online.
With a priority focus on the protection of our children online, the proposed act, if passed, will be a comprehensive approach to strengthening cybersecurity and privacy protections in schools, children's aid societies, hospitals, and indeed across the public sector. This proposed legislation has been years in the making and is built upon feedback from extensive consultations with stakeholders and the public held across our province between 2019 and 2024.
As digital learning and the use of digital tools increases, there are more cyber risks for our kids. It is critical we ensure our youngest learners are protected. And that's why we are here, to build on our government's commitment to keep students safe and focused on their back-to-basics learning. As you know, some weeks ago, we announced a comprehensive plan, some of the strongest measures in the country when it comes to restricting cell phone use in schools. Starting this fall, we will restrict cell phone use during instructional time. We will deny access to social media on school websites and networks. This will help ensure that students are safe and able to focus on what truly matters most during their instructional time.
Studies show that kids are using the internet at a younger age than ever before, and that the majority of sites aimed at young children collect their digital identifiers and share them with third-party marketing companies. Experts say children are at greater risk of harms posed by digital platforms, including privacy violations, cyberbullying, and other data-related harms.
Well, a surge in whooping cough cases in Europe has health experts keeping an eye on the situation.
CTV National Scott Hurst joins us live with more on this. Scott, thanks for being with us. How bad is the whooping cough situation in Europe?
Lena and Bakari, good afternoon. Canadian health officials are monitoring the situation in Europe as health officials there are sounding the alarm about a surge in cases across the continent. And it is a significant spike that health officials have been seeing over the past several months and into late last year, with 10 times as many identified cases as in each of the previous 2 years. The European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control confirming at least 11 deaths in infants and 8 among older adults, including 5 infant deaths in the UK. Now, the disease does go through peaks every few years, but according to health officials, the numbers are still historically high across much of that continent. Now, whooping cough or pertussis is highly contagious, and the first signs are similar to that of a cold. It starts with a runny nose, sneezing, fever, and mild cough, but after about a week, the infection can develop into a more serious bout of coughing that is quite significant, and in some cases, Bakari and Lena, can lead to some more severe and serious consequences.
Okay, Scott, is there a chance that this could come to Canada?
Well, there are cases in Canada. It's just a matter of how many every year. That is really the scope that health officials in Canada are looking at. While an outbreak has not been declared nationally in this country, whooping cough is regularly detected in Canada. According to the Public Health Agency of Canada, increased pertussis activity this year is not unexpected, as it comes on the heels of the COVID-19 pandemic, where fewer cases were reported. In a statement to CTV News, it says the disease typically averages between 500 and 4,500 cases annually in Canada, and bigger whooping cough epidemics are expected every 3 to 5 years, even in countries like Canada with higher vaccination rates. And in terms of the best chance to avoid getting whooping cough, health officials say vaccination is one of the best routes.
All right, Scott Hurst reporting live from our national newsroom. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, guys.
And coming up next on CP24 Live at noon, we're going to talk to the Canadian Cancer Society about its new stance on breast cancer screening.
Welcome back. The Canadian Cancer Society is changing its position on screening and calling for provinces and territories to lower the start age for breast screening programs to 40 for at-risk individuals. And for a closer look at this, we're joined live now by Sandra Krukal, Executive Vice President, Mission Information and Support Services at the Canadian Cancer Society. Sandra, thanks so much for making time for us here on Live at Noon.
My pleasure.
There's been a real debate about breast cancer screening and when to start. You seem to be changing your position here. You're now pushing for women 40 and up to get screened. Tell me why.
Yeah, it is a complex issue, but we really believe that people in Canada need fair and timely access, no matter where they live or who they are. And looking at the evidence in its totality, it is complex, but looking at modeling evidence and clinical trials, as well as real-world data, we feel that the evidence has evolved enough to a position now where we would say starting 40 and up every 2 years between the ages of 40 and 74 for mammography for breast cancer screening.
You also want to see all provinces provide the option for self-referral for individuals at high risk. What would that look like?
Yeah, we know right now that there are no guidelines nationally for primary care providers to have consistent sort of direction around how to deal with high risk. And we have heard from people who have a family history or have other factors that make them high risk, that they do face challenges sometimes in getting breast cancer screening. Right. And so if people are at high risk, we do believe there should not be a barrier to them, and they should be able to make that referral directly.
Yeah, the problem is, and you know this very well, Sandra, that for so many young women who have symptoms or concerns, they're told they're not eligible for mammograms. In Ontario, that's beginning to change. The province has lowered the age for publicly funded breast cancer screenings from 50 to 40 now. Do you think that goes far enough?
Yeah. At this time, we know that about 13% of all breast cancer cases are diagnosed in women who are 40 to 49. And then the vast majority, 83% of cases, are diagnosed at 50 and older. So there are between, under 30, under 40, there are about 5% of breast cancer cases that fall into that age range. And that's why we do think it's really important for people who are at high risk, who have that family history, who have had previous radiation therapy to the chest, or who have genetic markers of breast cancer, to have a pathway through that self-referral for you if you're in that category. And I would add that for women who do have signs and symptoms, it's not a screening pathway for you. It's a conversation with your doctor to talk about whether those signs and symptoms require diagnostic follow-up. And that's important. Screening is really for people who have no signs and symptoms, and it's a proactive way to detect breast cancer early.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction. I've got about a minute left here, Sandra, but I do want to ask you this. The messaging. For so long, us women have been told you don't need a mammogram until you're 50. That obviously is now outdated messaging. Are you concerned that not enough women in their 40s are going to sign up for these screenings?
I think it will take time, and that's why our position is a comprehensive one that does include raising awareness about the importance of screening for women. So that is critical, as well as investment in research and in better data and in access for people who are currently being underserved by screening. For a variety of different reasons. They may be rural and remote. They may be from racialized communities who are facing other barriers from the system. And so a comprehensive approach is critically important to ensure that screening overall reaches all the people that it needs to.
Sandra Krukel, Executive Vice President with the Canadian Cancer Society. We appreciate this conversation. It is an important one. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
And coming up next on CP24 Live at noon, we'll take a closer look at a disciplinary hearing for a high-ranking Toronto police officer who's admitted to providing exam answers to Black officers. Stay with us for a reaction. Welcome back to CP24 Live at noon. A disciplinary hearing continues for Superintendent Stacey Clark, a high-ranking Toronto police officer who is admitted to providing exam answers to Black officers.
Hey, we want to get some reaction to what's been happening at the tribunal now, and for that we turn to Jason Pete. He's written an op-ed in the Toronto Star about this case. He's also a Toronto business owner, actor, and writer. So, Jason, you've written about this promotion scandal. You say that many in the Black community admire Stacey Clark, not because she broke the rules, but because she tried to level the playing field. Tell us about your perspective, which, we have to be clear that it is your perspective.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, thanks for having me, first of all. With Ms. Clark, first of all, in the piece, I acknowledge what she did was wrong. But it's not like it's wrong done for personal gain. I mean, if she was selling these interview questions for, $1,000 a pop, we'd be having a totally different opinion and a different discussion. I'm sure she'd be facing a harsher penalty. But what she did was basically try to advance, the plight of officers in an organization that, by any number of reports, has been called out for systemic racism. And these reports go back a number of years, and nothing seems to change. And so, I applaud somebody. I mean, often in the Black community, one of my criticisms is that we often don't help out. Those at the top don't often help out those who need help, like some other communities do. So here was a woman, a trailblazing Black woman, who was willing to put her job on the line and jeopardize her future to, for the betterment of other Black officers in this police force. And so for that, I have to applaud her.
Jason, there are many people who will listen to this interview and say, well, the rules are the rules, and Ms. Clark broke them, and that she should be disciplined accordingly. I'm sure you've heard those perspectives. What do you say to that?
Well, then I just want to ask those individuals, then what should we do? Because they're correct. The rules are the rules. So then are we to then just play by the rules and then hope that maybe in 5, 10 years, 20 years, in my children and grandchildren's generation, things might change. Because let's face it, we're in 2024 and still having these discussions regarding race. And, you know, it's just in 2023 that the Ontario Human Rights Commission released a report that called out the police for a number of things and came up with a number of recommendations. And even then, acting Chief Raymer refused to accept the accusation of systemic racism. He said, yes, there are individual officers who are racist, who may be racist, and they will be dealt with individually on a one-off basis. But he refused to accept that the force is systemically racist. And not too long before then, I think the same thing happened with the RCMP when they were called systemically racist. And their chief, once again, refused to acknowledge that they were. So if you don't have these organizations that are willing to accept that they are systemically racist and they need to make those changes, then it's up to people like Stacey Clark to say, well, look, we've tried to play by the rules. We've pushed it. Like, how much longer can we push it? So I'm going to do what I have to do. It's as simple as that, really.
But also, Jason, you know, when it comes to policing and how it is scrutinized, it's important to get it right. Isn't it important that these officers actually know the information, maybe get a study group together so that they actually have that information that they've retained instead of just getting the answers?
Sure. But that's, definitely they can do that. But the way I'm looking into the situation and reading into the situation is, even if they were fully prepared on their own merits, they would still not receive those promotions just based on some of the systemic racism that, once again, exists within the force. And that is the problem. You will have people, and this has been going on for a number of years, where you have individuals who are fully qualified, Black individuals who are fully qualified, fully educated, probably more educated and more qualified than their their colleagues, their white colleagues, and they're denied those promotions. And at some point, when you try to play by the rules and you do everything that you need to do, you get yourself educated, you're a good employee, you do everything to the best of your ability, but still, because of the color barrier, you're unable to advance, then, once again, I put it back on those individuals. What more can we do?
Okay. It's been good to get your perspective on this. Jason Pete, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jason.
Thanks for having me.
And with that, Superintendent Stacey Clark is being cross-examined at a police tribunal hearing today. The Toronto Maple Leafs have fired head coach Sheldon Keefe. This comes after the team lost their first-round playoff series against the Boston Bruins in Game 7 Saturday night. The Toronto Maple Leafs have fired head coach Sheldon Keefe. This comes after the team lost their first-round playoff series again against the Boston Bruins in Game 7. This was Saturday night.
Toronto Police Superintendent Stacey Clark is being cross-examined today at a police tribunal hearing after she admitted to providing exam answers to Black officers.
And the Canadian Cancer Society is changing its position on screening and calling for provinces to lower the age for breast cancer screenings.
Good afternoon and welcome to CP24 Live at Noon. Thanks for being with us. I'm Lena Latifat.
Now, Bakari Savage. Sheldon Keefe has been fired as head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Keefe was promoted from the Marlies to head coach of the Leafs midway through the 2019-2020 season. Despite making it to the playoffs every year he was head coach, the team only won a single playoff series and were ousted in the first round again this year in 7 games against the Bruins. Really felt like deja vu. The Leafs management says it's time for a new voice, and the search for a new coach will begin immediately. General Manager Brad Treliving and President Brendan Shanahan are scheduled to speak to the media tomorrow alongside new MLSE boss Keith Pelly. And Keefe just released a video on social media this afternoon where he spoke about his time in Toronto. Watch this.
I'm forever grateful for the opportunity to coach the Toronto Maple Leafs. It's a dream come true for a boy from Brampton. I want to thank Kyle Dubas, Lou Lamoriello, Brad Treliving, Brandon Pridham, Brendan Shanahan, Larry Tannenbaum, and the MLSE board for giving me this opportunity to work with the Marlies and Leafs. I didn't get it done in the playoffs. I didn't help push our team over the line and deliver. I accept responsibility for that. No excuses. That's the job. I didn't get it done.
For reaction to Keefe's firing, we're joined live by Parminder Singh, a founding host and founding voice of Hockey Night in Canada in Punjabi, and now Punjabi voice of the NBA Raptors. Okay, let's just get your reaction to that video because this is new.
Absolutely, this just came out. I just watched it with you guys,
yeah.
And so very raw emotions and. So again, very PC. What he said. Great guy. Sheldon Keefe has been known to be such a good individual. Young guy who aged quite a bit in his tenure with the Leafs the last couple of years, and you can imagine how stressful this is. But his parting ways, obviously, he's looking at that he wasn't able to do what he was hired to do, and but it's not only his job to do that.
And that brings me to my next question, because oftentimes when teams have a bad run, there's a fall guy, if you will, right? And they're under pressure. They've got to make some big changes. And so the Leafs do this. Is it enough?
It's, again, with the diehard Leafs fans, we always hold on to, I shouldn't say we, but any Leaf fan holds on to that inkling of hope of what's going to happen. Perhaps this change will assist. Now, the choices were very limited. What do we do? I mean, there's three ways. Do we effectively shake up the top brass? And that's now Brendan Shanahan as at helm. He's been here for 10 years. So everything kind of does rest on his shoulders when it comes to the team in itself. We got a new GM when Kyle Dubas stepped away last season. They parted ways mutually. And Brad Treliving decided to extend the contract with Sheldon Keefe, which was the head coach, and now we're saying goodbye to him. But we've got the four core guys. Do we break them up? With Matthews around, who signed the extension, we got Nylander, but then you've got Tavares and Marner, who could potentially be sticking around or on their way out, but they've got no move clauses in their contract as well. So it's very interesting. But yes, they did decide to go with saying goodbye to Sheldon Keefe. So
along with that, what do you think is going to be the ideal outcome situation here? And also, front office changes.
Absolutely. So I don't know, and I haven't heard anything in the rumor mill about any of the front office changes. We know Sheldon Keefe is gone. We don't know what's going to happen with the assistant coaches. They've struggled with the special teams, especially with the playoffs, but there's a lot of rumors out there on who could potentially fill his shoes. Now, what we know, from the Toronto Maple Leafs perspective on what do they need, and obviously to go deep into the playoffs. Sheldon Keefe had a lot of success in the regular season, but just couldn't get past, well, we did last season into the second round, but we've tinkled with it, but that's about it. Now, names are being thrown around. You need perhaps some no-nonsense style coaches who are going to call out the star power. Now, with star power, there's challenges because you have to ultimately, with younger players who are super talented, is also massage egos at times when they're younger players. Now, the way the NHL and at times we're looking at how teams are being managed, we've gone towards the stats route, looking at who's a great player, who's winning these battles, and so forth. But when it comes to the playoffs, it seems like things are thrown out the window. So you can get the regular season success, but if you don't have that team culture where everyone is putting their 100% on the line, and here it might have been unfair to Sheldon Keefe as well. Just remember, Matthews was missing for a couple of games. We had, Nylander wasn't available. So with what he had, he did a great job and get the team to Game 7. And a lot of risque moves when he put Wall in net. And then had Samsonov come back for Game 7, right? Obviously because of injury. But he did the right things, but there's a lot of questions around the team culture.
He did the best he could. The team is obviously looking for better. And they have a little bit of money to play with here to find the right coach. I've got about 30 seconds left here, but your response to that, the money angle.
Oh, yeah. Look, we can attract individuals to Toronto, but I think, looking at some of the coaches with Gerard Gallant as a name that's being thrown out, but Craig Roubaix, probably the best bet from my perspective. He won the Cup with the Blues in 2019, had star power with them, figured out how to manage that as well. I think Guy Boucher is another individual. We promoted the ranks of Sheldon Keefe through the AHL, and perhaps if that would be the case, but yes, but more so than money, because I've said this in smaller circles, that money can get you the top seeds within the regular season, but it's the heart that will get you deep into the playoffs.
So well said. Yeah. All right, on that note, Parminder Singh, we want to thank you so much for your time. It's been great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And right now it's 12:38, 15 degrees. Let's get a check on the lunch hour rush with Adjua and Sia Bois. Adj.
Yeah, it's a busy one out there on the major routes, but I'll start with some good news for the afternoon drive. We were dealing with problems. They were on the Niagara Bound lanes at the QEW. It was the ramp from third line on to the QEW Niagara Bound. It was a situation. Everything cleared. They did zoom out on the camera, so I can assure you the problems are gone. What isn't gone is a little bit of a delay, which is starting to improve. It was really jammed through Kennedy, still continues slow all the way out to the Allen, both corn collectors if you're on the 401. Eastbound 401 for that lunchtime rush, not too bad. It's just busy in sections from the 427 as you head out towards about the Weston Road stretch. As you're traveling onto the Don Valley Parkway northbound, definitely seeing delays as you head from Eglinton and you continue all the way up towards the 401. On the southbound side, we're seeing some slow-moving maintenance crew make their way through Eglinton. That is not the case anymore, so things are starting to wrap up. And outside of camera view, crews are on scene of a collision, this one impacting Victoria Park right around Ellesmere. I'll send it back to you.
The CP24 traffic report is brought to you by CapitalDirect.ca.
An Oakville home has been destroyed in an overnight fire. Firefighters were called to the house on Bridge Road around 2 a.m. As when they arrived, they found the house fully engulfed. And according to fire officials, the home was vacant. There were no injuries. The Ontario Fire Marshal has been notified.
Well, the province is introducing a new legislation to better protect kids' data online.
Yes, an expanding online world does provide tremendous benefits for our children, but we must recognize the unique vulnerabilities children face today. Vulnerabilities that, quite frankly, none of us ever had to face while we were growing up. So we truly are charting a new territory in this digital world, and we must do all that we can as legislators, as parents, as teachers, as children's aid workers, as industry experts, and the list goes on.
We know there's more work to do, which is why today we're also announcing our intent to bring forth all social media executives and tech industry experts, along with law enforcement, to meet with the government with an aim to crack down on cybercrimes, cyberbullying, trafficking, and online victimization of our children, designed to safeguard access to age-appropriate web material and to deny the workarounds of enterprising students when it comes to software exploits within our schools. This will help us keep students safe online and in the classroom.
Studies show that kids are using the internet at a younger age than ever before. And that majority of sites, they're aimed at young children. They collect their digital identifiers and share them with third-party marketing companies. So experts say that children are at greater risk of harms posed by digital platforms, including privacy violations, cyberbullying, and other data-related harms.
NDP MPP Wayne Gates was joined by several advocacy groups and members of other parties in calling on the government to establish a caregiver benefit.
A direct financial benefit will lead to cost savings in our long-term care retirement homes and social service sector. And in fact, and this is really important, a caregiver allowance of only $400 a month could replace 7.8% of Ontario's long-term care beds, for an immediate cost savings of $480 million. Quite frankly, this is a common sense. It's a win, and a win solution that will help our seniors, our kids, and our grandkids in Ontario living with disabilities, that will save the province money and reduce the burden on our long-term care system.
Pavani Patel left her career to become a full-time caregiver for her father, who suffers from dementia. Here's more from her.
Emotionally, it affects us, me particularly. socially. It impacts your sleep and mental health, your physical health. Caregivers like me, and there are millions of them all over Ontario, we do our best proactively to keep our loved ones healthy. We keep them out of the hospital, which then in turn helps and improves the hospital capacity and flow. We close the gaps that are prevalent today that we see with limitation of services with community care.
A surprising number of young people are also tasked with caregiving duties for a family member. Christy Sadowski is with the Young Caregivers Association. She has a special needs child and says that other children are involved in his care.
The stress level in our home is higher than their friends and higher than many people really understand. My kids live a different life, and so do all of our young caregivers. They live a different life because they have this added responsibility. But what's important to note is our kids are also saving the government between $25,000 and $50,000 a year that would be spent in PSWs or other forms of health care.
Roughly 3.3 million Ontarians report having provided unpaid care for family or friends. And of those, more than 1.2 million are between the ages of 14 and 25 years old. A coalition of caregiving and healthcare groups have penned a letter to Premier Ford in support of a direct benefit.
Well, also making news today, Superintendent Stacey Clark is being cross-examined at a police tribunal hearing today.
Clark was explaining and describing the moments that she took photos of questions for a promotional exam and sent them to candidates in advance. And Clark says that she broke the rules in the wake of the Toronto Police Service abandoning a hiring process she said would have made the entire promotions procedure more fair to black candidates. Well, human rights, social justice, and anti-racism advocate Kingsley Gilliam spoke to reporters outside the tribunal.
The situation that Stacey Clark is charged with is an open secret in the community for 5 decades that I personally have been involved with Toronto Police and other police.
The tribunal is deciding how to discipline Clark, mostly by where she will stand in the rankings.
Well, the country's major housing markets are starting to recover, but one economist says that a more pronounced recovery cannot be sustained until interest rates move significantly lower.
Robert Hogue, assistant chief economist at RBC, says while sellers have begun re-entering the market, affordability conditions are still weighing on buyers. He says figures from local real estate boards last month highlight sharp increases in new listings and inventory across Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. Hogue also points to lower home resale figures in March and April in most major markets as buyers are not moving to capitalize on increases in supply. And Leah Zlatkin is an expert at lowestrates.ca and a licensed mortgage broker. She says this could be a good time to enter the market.
A lot of people can't qualify for the mortgages at today's rates. If you can qualify for the mortgages at today's rate, there's a lot of inventory and you're going to have less competition. As soon as rates start going down, competition's going to heat up. More people will qualify than there are today.
Many economists are predicting that the Bank of Canada will start lowering rates in June. This will be followed by further cuts of the second half of the year and then into 2025.
Well, the 3 major federal party leaders are far less popular than their predecessors, according to data analysis by Angus Reid.
So as of last month, there's never been a time when leaders of all 3 parties solicited as much discontent all at the same time. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is most popular with a -12 net rating. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is at -14, and Prime Minister Trudeau's approval has dropped to its lowest point at just 28%, with a net approval of -38.
The risk of wildfires is high in Western Canada, but officials say the situation is better than it was at this time last year. The Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre says there are 90 fires burning right now, and 7 are out of control. Almost half of the fires are in Alberta, and a third are in BC. Officials say the ongoing drought conditions mean the risk of damaging wildfires is significant, particularly in the northern prairies and BC interior. Almost every region has seen months of warmer than average weather, a trend Environment Canada expects to continue.
Okay, this is something that, kind of upsets me a little bit. A new study suggests that certain ultra-processed foods are worse for the health than others. So researchers found processed meats and sugary foods and drinks, the stuff that we like, the good stuff, they were worse than ultra-processed grains. So in a 30-year observational study, those who ate the most processed foods had a 4% higher risk of deaths by any cause. So researchers also found that the most important factor to reducing risk of death is the quality of a person's overall diet.
The U.S. is putting in new rules for dogs entering the country. Starting in August, dogs entering the U.S. must be at least 6 months old, be microchipped, and be accompanied by a CDC dog import form receipt that was filled out online before arrival. Those rules apply to all dogs, including service dogs and those who were born in the U.S. but are returning from another country. The new rules are meant to curb the spread of canine rabies.
And coming up next on CP24 Live at noon, it is Children's Mental Health Week, and we're going to take a closer look at some of the issues facing young people. That's next. Well, it's Children's Mental Health Week, and for more on the issues facing youth, we're joined live by Aubrey Nerona, the founder of Hello Hope Canada and Safe Schools, mental health and anti-racism speaker. Aubrey, it's really great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
You go to schools all over. You speak to hundreds of students. Let's talk about some of the issues that they're facing today, because I don't know what it's like to be a teenager today.
Yeah, I have so many conversations with students these days, online, in assemblies when I'm doing high school or elementary school assemblies, in the hallways. And what I'm realizing is they need hope more than ever. And they need to trust that we, as the grown folks, have them covered.
Okay, so how do we have those conversations, whether we are, an uncle, aunt, a relative, or a parent?
I think our presence, just being there, literally opens up the door to these kids' hearts, whether they're 17 years old and they're used to being on TikTok all day, or whether they're 8 years old and they just want to play with Lego. Literally, the conversations open up just by being there. And I see that with my own kids. I don't have to know everything about all of the little toys and gadgets, but just being there literally can open up their hearts to the convo.
Can you give us some basics to start the conversation and also, probe the conversation a little bit further?
Yeah, some of the basics that I found works for me is literally getting creative with the questions we ask instead of, how was your day? Sometimes it's literally, what's one thing that made you smile today? What's one thing that you found difficult today? Get real specific. And I find that whether it's a teenager or a young student, it can open up such a conversation that's rich.
So you were just saying how you were speaking to 600 students and a few minutes in, you started crying. Talk about that.
I'm realizing I used to be a corrections officer, and I used to work with youth who were in trouble with the law. And then I bring the heart behind that work into my work with students across Ontario. And what I found is, if I keep it honest, keep it 100 with what's happening in my personal world with them, the authenticity goes right into their hearts. So I was at a presentation at Hamilton Wentworth District School Board yesterday, 600 high school students, and I told them I was just going through something real difficult. Half an hour before I came on this stage, I was crying, and I said, you know what though? If I bring that authenticity here with you, with a little bit of hope, I think we can get through this together. And a bunch of these kids came up to me crying and saying, thank you for being real. That helps us feel like we can be real.
Can you give us a little bit of the hope and instill some of that inspiration so that we can, take that with us as we go into the weekend and next week and beyond?
This is what I like to say. I came across this quote a couple of years ago, and it changed my life. And it simply said, instead of trying to see through one another, let's see one another through. Right? In a day and age where whether it's parents and guardians or students, we're all distracted and we don't necessarily give a care about the people on the left or on our right who are strangers, and we do see through one another. Let's flip that to seeing one another through. Let's get each other to the end of the school day, end of the week, end of the semester, end of the work week, end of the month, end of our careers.
Let's see one another through. I love it. Aubrey Nerona, the founder of Hello Hope Canada and Safe Schools, mental health and anti-racism speaker. Aubrey, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching CP24 Live at noon.